by a statement that had been made by Robert Dutton in a deposition. And it seemed to contradict what Secord said about the willingness to give some of the assets over to the CIA, or all the assets of the enterprise over to the CIA. I went back, actually Ken Buck of our staff went back at noon and looked it up and found that that was really taken out of context, that when you read the whole deposition, just one page later actually, what you found is that there wasn't a contradiction at all. Is that the type of taking things out of context that maybe you're talking about?
Yes, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but let me make one thing very clear about whose idea it was to cause those assets to be sold to the CIA. That idea was Director William J. Casey's, and I caused it to be put back into the proposals.
Right. I'm glad you clarified that for us. Let me give you another example. When the New York Times published on June 18, 1987, and I quote the following, "According to congressional investigators," end of quote. And then that article went on to state that Glenn Robinette had told our committee in closed executive session deposition of a direct link, that there was a direct link between General Secord and Edwin Wilson. That was the story that ran. Yet, when he came in, when Robinette came in to testify, he didn't say that at all. In fact, he said just the opposite. Is that the type of problem you have seen with this committee?
Certainly would seem that way, sir.
Let me give you another example. There were 3 donors who were brought in here to testify. We put on this panel. The panel had 3 donors. One had been shown a munitions list. One had been told that if he gave enough, he could meet with the president if he hit a certain level. And one who spoke with Director Casey, and then after that, he gave directly into the Lake Resources account. There was a clear implication at that time that all the private donors approached by Spitz Channel had been given munitions list, all had been told they could see the president, and all donors had given to the Lake Resources account. It wasn't said, but that was the implication. Would it surprise you to know that this committee interviewed many, many, many people, the staff did, and those were the only 3, each one, that could testify about that particular thing? Again, it wasn't false, but it was just a little bit misleading, gave the wrong impression. Is that the type of thing you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Let me give you another example. Brett Scroney came in here. He's the man who did the legal opinion about the Boland Amendment. He wasn't, he was asked a little bit about his legal opinion, the quality of the opinion, what it looked like to defend it. But the majority of the attack on him wasn't on that. It was an attack on him. It was, let's try Mr. Scroney. Let's see if he passed the bar the first time. Let's get into all these things. Does that seem to you to maybe be missing the point of what this whole committee should be dealing with, which is one of the things, a policy question? Now, there is a legal question about the Boland Amendment. We all have difference of opinions. We're, I hope, good friends on this committee, but we have difference of opinion. Is that the type of thing you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
And finally, and I could go on, but my time is very limited, would it surprise you to know, I don't imagine it would, but the fact that I went back and counted, and prior to yesterday afternoon, now it changed yesterday afternoon, but prior to yesterday afternoon, by my calculations, going through the transcript, on 24 different times, your very able lawyer had made an objection. For some reason, on 24 straight times, your able attorney had been overruled. Now, does that surprise you?
Nothing surprises me anymore, Congressman.
I don't think, and I want to be fair, I won't put this in its historic perspective. I'm not criticizing our chairman. I think they're both good chairmen. I'm really not. And now let me explain that to you.
Will the representative...
If I could finish, and I think I will yield if you want me to now, or if I could finish, Mr. Chairman, I think I could...
On a point of personal privilege.
Certainly, but it won't come from my time, will it, Mr. Chairman?
I'll give you time. If you at any time felt that the ruling of the chair was unfair, you know very well that the rules would have provided you to speak up. On each ruling that this chair made, not a single member of the panel objected to my ruling. And as far as I'm concerned, my rulings were correct. Please proceed.
Well, I made a mistake, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't object at that time. Let me put in historical perspective, if I could. And as I started to say, I'm not blaming either one of the able chairmen. I'm really not. I think the problem is a more organic or more basic problem. And I think it's something that's been with us for many, many years. And I think it is something that Arthur Lyman, I don't see him, but Arthur Lyman, when he was a young undergraduate or maybe graduate student, I don't know, in the early 50s, and we just come off, or the country had just come off the Army McCarthy hearings, and he saw some of the abuses. And he wrote and indicated that maybe some changes needed to be made. I think some changes need to be made. And I think that's one thing that maybe people on both sides of the aisle will be able to deal with after these hearings are over. We need some firm rules. We need some rules which guarantee fairness and guarantee that we can get at the truth. Now, I don't propose to turn this into a court of law. Lord forbid we don't need to do that. We have other functions. We have a function of debating policy, and we've all done that, and we disagree, but I don't know that the Congress could have more able people than the chairman and Jack Brooks. I look over there and look all around about debating policy. That's proper here. This is not a court of law. But when we get to the question of fact, away from policy into fact, which is another one of our responsibilities, it seems to me that some of the rules that are used in court, not all of them, but some of them that have come down through the ages, literally, and that we have evolved and we have used in our court and we have tested them, some of those should be used. Basic hearsay. We've had hearsay and double hearsay and triple hearsay. And the reason we've had it is because there aren't any rules that say that we shouldn't have it. That's a problem, and it's a problem when we ask witnesses, and I've probably been guilty of it too, but we ask witnesses to speculate about what someone else was thinking about. What did that person think? What was their motive? And we all know that that's not probative, that's not accurate, that's not the way we tell what the truth is. These rules didn't just come down, handed to us from someone else, and they just didn't evolve in order to protect defendants or to straitjacket a court. They came down because they deal with two things. One, it's a good way to tell the truth, it's the best way, and two, it's fundamentally fair. It's fundamentally fair that one person should not be examined based upon that hearsay. And so maybe if something, I think a lot of good things are going to come out of these hearings, but maybe that's one that the liberals, the conservatives, Republicans, and Democrats can all agree on, and maybe we can work in that area. Let me move on if I could. I've got some areas that I would like to clean up, at least in my mind, Lieutenant, that are not clear. Let me start with Bud McFarlane. He's going to be following you apparently as a witness on the stand. I want to get into the question about the NSC and about the application of the Boland Amendment to the NSC. Now, when Mr. McFarlane, you've already expressed your opinion about that it does not apply, Boland does not apply to the NSC. Mr. McFarlane previously testified and told this committee that in his opinion it did. And in fact, he even went on to say, talking about my chairman, the chairman of our Foreign Affairs Committee, that if Danny Fussell tells you to do something, by golly, you better not do it. And I understand that. I respect that. But I want to know, did he ever tell you that? Did he ever tell you, if the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee says don't do something, then by golly, you shouldn't be doing it?
I never heard that, sir.
Did he ever call a staff meeting and he sat down and said, look, in my opinion, Boland applies to the NSC?
I never heard that.
Did he ever send you a memo that you can recall, or a memo to the rest of the staff that said that?
No, there are memoranda that I received back from both Mr. McFarlane and Admiral Poindexter telling me not to do certain things, and when they told me that, I didn't do them.
But you don't recall that?
No, sir, and I want to make it very clear again. Every single thing that I did that required a decision, I sought approval for, and if I didn't get approval, I didn't do it.
All right, let me move on to Elliott Abrams. And again, I'm trying to clean up the record in the sense that these are things that I don't understand, or I think there's blanks in the record. I may be wrong about that, but if you'll just bear with me. You've testified that you believe the Assistant Secretary of State, Elliott Abrams, was aware of your activities. And I want to ask you some specific questions, if I could. Did you ever tell Elliott Abrams about your, I was going to say instructions to Ambassador Tams to open up a Southern Front, but you've already told us you really didn't give him instructions in that area. But did you ever have a discussion about the Southern Front, the opening up of that with Elliott Abrams, that you can recall?
As I have testified, the opening of a Southern Front was viewed as an absolute political and military necessity by everybody on the restricted interagency group. And there's no doubt that I had told members of the group that an airfield was being built by the private benefactor organization or whatever, Project Democracy, whatever euphemism I used at the time, and that it was being done with the assistance of people at the embassy. I do not recall whether I specified that it was Ambassador Tams.
Okay, do you recall us, and I don't want to quibble with you here, and I appreciate your recollection, do you recall any specific conversation with Elliott Abrams about that? I appreciate what you've said, but I'd like to know that.
I do not recall a specific conversation. There is no doubt that that subject came up at some length, and there was, after all, a conference call among Ambassador Tams, Mr. Abrams, and myself one evening when the exposure of that airfield became an issue.
When it became an issue. Do you ever recall any conversation with Elliott Abrams about any other aspect of that prior to that date, prior to when it became an issue?
No, but I would point out again, when I called him or he called me or however it worked, neither of us were surprised.
Neither was surprised.
Well, in other words, when that issue of exposure of a secret airfield in that country came to be an issue, it was no great surprise to him or to the ambassador or to anyone. I mean, we knew that we did not want it exposed. We did not want to jeopardize the previous administration in that country that had helped us build it, nor jeopardize the personnel that were engaged in it.
Colonel, I want to thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate your time. I appreciate also your very distinguished record of service to this country. It is appreciated by all of us and seems to really have touched a chord with the American people. As I stated before, I think that in the past this committee maybe has been a little unfair with you. Particularly putting that chart up there and you didn't have a chance to respond to that bothers me. But I think that in the last 6 days you have been given an opportunity to talk about your involvement, and frankly you have used that forum very ably as I have ever seen a witness in front of the United States Congress. The only parting comment that I would make is that I am a little troubled as you leave. I am troubled by the fact that the suspicion that we may revert to our old pattern on this committee again. We seem to have started where an opportunity was going to be given for witnesses to come back. Bud McFarlane is going to come back, and I don't object to that. But he's going to be coming back and apparently try to contradict some of the things that you have said. And I just wonder how far we take this. Are we going to allow every witness who wants to come back for the second and third time to come back? Or are we going to turn this into a debating club where we go back and forth? And I guess that I'm bothered by what may happen in the future, that maybe some memos will be brought forward or witnesses will be brought forward that we have not seen who will directly attack you or who may make a comment about you, about the facts, and then a new fact, and then you will not have the opportunity to respond to that. I suspect, however, that there are some members of the committee that don't want to see you come back here. You have used this as a platform, the opportunity to be, I think, a very effective witness, particularly when you have talked about some of the areas in Central America, the threat that the United States faces down there, what is going on in regard to Iran. You have been a very eloquent and I think very effective witness, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll be glad to yield.
Seconds. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I would just like to say that I, in each and every occasion, did not feel that the rulings of the chair were correct. But I, as well as probably Congressman DeWine, did not object at that time because of our respect for the chair, and particularly because of our respect and high esteem for the individuals that are the chairs. And I think that silence indicates that and nothing else. Thank you.
Well, I would concur in that. I'll take my time back and agree with the gentleman. There should not be misinterpreted lack of respect. I have had more opportunity to work with Chairman Hamilton than I have with Senator Inouye.
There have been very few surprises. Congressman Boland this afternoon, for example, in his presentation with Mr. North, was quite a lot more friendly, I think, to Colonel North than you would have thought might have come from the author of the Boland Amendment, the amendment which which Colonel North is accused of kind of flinging down and dancing on. But that's Eddie Boland. Eddie Boland is a pretty affable guy, and that's the way he approached him. Lee Hamilton is a pretty eloquent guy, and that's what came through. Daniel Inouye is a rather stern man, although I think privately he is a somewhat more affable and amiable character than he might have come through to some who watched the hearings. Senator Rudman referred, as you heard, Peter, to angry and nasty mail containing racial or ethnic slurs.
Oh, is that what it was? Because nobody told us exactly what they were referring to.
Yeah, I think it was directed at the chairman. There seems to have been some impression created in the minds of some people that the chairman was harsh or that the chairman was unfair to Colonel North. You should know, Peter, that apart from what Senator Rudman said, Dan Inouye is one of the most popular members of the Senate. He is wildly popular.
Not to mention a national monument in Hawaii. Britt, stand by for just a second and we'll go to Sam Donaldson on the Hill. Sam, the White House, this particular administration has always had a very keen eye and a keen ear for public presentation. So how will those two addresses of Congressman Hamilton and Senator Inouye go down?
Well, that's why I think White House officials for the past several days have been saying that while Colonel North's testimony was helpful from the standpoint of making the case for the Contras, they were not embracing him wholeheartedly because they understood that what lives by the television camera may die by the television camera. And they also understood, having been his colleagues for a long time, that Colonel North was given to making statements like the one concerning the thing you and Britt have been discussing that could be punctured to some extent. For instance, Britt says Colonel North might have replied to Daniel Inouye that it was just that speculation that he was talking about. But of course, that wasn't speculation. That was based on fact. When ABC, and I was the one who did it, said during that period that it is understood here at the White House that the president has decided to strike Libya, and if so, never will such a military action have been so widely forecast as this one. It was because I was told that. I was told that by a U.S. official right back here who knew exactly that I was going to use it on the air and who, in fact, wanted me to use it on the air. So it wasn't speculation, and it wasn't the senators, and it wasn't the media. It was U.S. officials for their own purposes.
Sam, it was Senator Inouye, I think, but surely others have said it's the sentiment of the week that the Congress has helped to in the creation of an American hero. I know the White House has been polling, so, I mean, somebody's told me that in my ear, so why don't you tell me what the results are?
That's right. The White House took a poll last night. Actually, it was Dick Werthlin, who is the president's, the pollster for the Republican National Committee, and his polls, of course, are made available to the White House. And they polled 600 people by telephone, and they have found that by a margin of 48% to 46%, people now say that they would support economic and military assistance to the Contras against the government of Nicaragua. That was the way the question was put. And they say here they've never had such a poll like that. They've never had it better than 60-40 against aid. So they're encouraged by it, but very cautiously, Peter, because they understand these polls are not going to reflect what the true sentiment of the country is until after these hearings are over and the case is all in.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much. I mean, the question of the polls, at least the ones that we've done and the ones we've seen, do not suggest that Colonel North has been made into a hero. Let us go back inside the Senate caucus room now, and you were looking there at the center of that crowd of still photographers, Robert McFarlane, the National Security Advisor from October '83 until December '85, and is appearing before the committees again at his own request. And we understand that because, or from that there is some contradiction between his testimony and that of Colonel North. So, Britt, we really got to pound back into the facts here again. What do you think it is he wants to straighten out?
Well, things that we've been told that need to be straightened out. The overall authorizations that that Colonel North has said he was given by his superiors. Part of the time, that, of course, that means Mr. McFarlane, since Mr. McFarlane was his boss, is also as well the question during that period of, yes, that's fine.
Britt, can I interrupt you for 1 second? There's the congressman again we've had difficulty identifying this morning, and we apologize for it, Robert Dornan from California, who is whispering now in McFarlane's ear. And I gather that one of the things that Mr. Dornan has done earlier today was to suggest that Colonel North should now run the National Security Council.
Peter, excuse me for not answering you directly on that. Standing with me right now is Lee Hamilton, the chairman of the House committee here, and I wanted to ask you, Congressman Hamilton, if I could. You said before you made that rather eloquent statement that these were your impressions. Those were pretty heavy impressions, weren't they?
Well, they were, but I've had a long time to listen and to form some impressions. I tried to put into perspective my feelings about Colonel North's testimony. I tried very hard not to be judgmental about Colonel North, to focus on the process itself, and I certainly do not hold Colonel North responsible for the process or the dilemmas that he was put in by the process.
Let me ask you this, Congressman, if I may. What did you hope would be the effect of your statement?
Well, I hope it was helpful in putting it into perspective and raising some of the questions that I think we're going to have to address in a final report. We began all of this exercise by saying that some things went wrong, some mistakes were made, and we want to identify those mistakes and see if there are legislative solutions or recommendations that will help. When I talked about accountability, when I talked about the manner in which covert actions ought to be handled, I was directing my thoughts really to the final report of the committee.
Congressman, if I could just to pick you up on one of your phrases, you said you were pointing out to the colonel that he had said he was erroneous, evasive, and wrong, and you said, I'm impressed that the policy was driven by a policy of lies. That sounds to me to be pretty conclusive.
Well, isn't that the case? I mean, we just heard over and over and over again that one untruth, one lie, right after the other was made. And I think Americans have to be very concerned about that and disturbed by it. My impression is that Colonel North is disturbed by that. When he told us that he had lied to the Congress, when he had stated some untruths in other fora, I think there was quite a look of anguish on his face. I don't think that was a false face. I think it was a sincere face. And I can agree with the anguish of his position.
I'd like to ask you one more question, Congressman, and I realize it's a delicate one. I'm not quite sure how to put it except bluntly. On a number of occasions, the name of the late director of the CIA, William Casey, has been invoked, as I did it with his approval. And quite frankly, some not very sensitive people have said, well, there they go again. That's the testimony of the dead man. But is that not perhaps the case?
When I first began hearing these events back in November and December of last year, it was my impression that Director Casey was not intricately involved in these events. I must say that as I have listened to Colonel North and others testify, I think I made a mistake. I think I misjudged the extent of Mr. Casey's involvement.
Or, I apologize, Congressman, could I interrupt? Or are we, to continue being blunt, are we hearing the late director of the CIA, in your view, being used by witnesses because he can't answer for himself?
Well, I hope that's not the case. It may be very hard for us to find out the truth about Mr. Casey now. We've had a lot of very direct statements by Colonel North implicating Director Casey. We'll want to pursue that with the cabinet secretaries that are coming in a short while. We'll want to pursue it with Admiral Poindexter to try to get a total picture.
Congressman Hamilton, you sat and listened without asking any questions to all of Colonel North's testimony. My impression is you did not miss a minute. Do you think he was telling the truth?
Basically, I think Colonel North was telling the truth. I have a high degree of confidence in his credibility. I have some questions here and there about the testimony, as I guess you'd have with anybody you listen to for 6 days, but I think he was telling the truth.
Let me ask you now, we have Robert McFarlane in there to resolve or at least to deal with some apparent contradictions. What is going to come of all that? Are we going to see direct and severe contradictions in testimony here?
We are going to see direct and severe contradictions. I don't have any doubt about that. The committee's not going to be able to resolve all those contradictions. I don't think it's necessary for us to say this man we believe, this man we don't believe. After all, what we're interested in is understanding what happened, what the process was, and how we can correct it. We're not a court of law.
Just one last question, Congressman, and we do thank you for joining us. I just heard you mention about cabinet secretaries and the like coming. Colonel North is the high point. And as the French might say, some people think he's the denouement, the end of things. But how much longer is this going to go on?
Well, I think the impact of Colonel North's testimony is to push the problem up the chain of command. He said everything I did was authorized. I think he was sincere in making that statement. If that's the case, then Admiral Poindexter has to answer some tough questions because he was the man in charge at the National Security Council.
When are your hearings going to end?
We will finish the hearings the end of the first week in August if we stay on our present schedule, and I think we'll make that.
That's what you said when Colonel North first came along, Congressman.
Well, we got a little behind with Colonel North.
Sam Donaldson has a question. Sam?
Well, I don't have a real question for Representative Hamilton. I wanted to get in when he had finished his statement, but I don't want to interrupt him.
Well, then I apologize. Why don't we thank Congressman very much for coming, and let you go back, sir, because Mr. McFarlane is in the Senate caucus room, and I will continue to pick Sam and Britt's brains. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Okay,
Peter,
Sam.
What I wanted to do was pick up when Representative Hamilton had talked about his opening statement on Daniel in No Ways, which was not as closely knit as Mr. Hamilton's, but was more emotional and emotionally delivered from a man who'd lost his arm in World War II. And I was struck by the fact that Brendan Sullivan, the smart lawyer who has been working with Colonel North, and by smart I mean it sincerely, interrupted just at a point when Daniel in No Way was bringing up the Nuremberg principle. And Sullivan said, oh, you're attacking North and you're my client and all that. But I think Sullivan was just interrupting again to break the train, because this is a powerful point. North has said that everything he did was approved by his superiors, but in no way was making the point, Peter, that we have established clearly that an unlawful order must not be obeyed. And if North knew that any of those orders that he said were approved weren't ones that complied with the law, or if he suspected it, he had an obligation not to obey it.
Well, Sam, I must tell you that this is where I end up the week as confused as I began, because as I think I raised with you on Monday or Tuesday, or whenever, last week, I guess, I don't know who's ever going to make the final judgment as to whether or not the Boland amendments, plural, were violated.
Yeah, but there are other laws. Obstruction of justice, for instance, we're talking about the cover-up, if we will. We're talking about other laws. Now, McFarlane's coming in, and he will contradict to some extent what Colonel North testified to. And I now can tell you, Peter, you've been asking me all day, what about the Poindexter testimony? I've talked to 2 or 3 people who suggest that tomorrow, Admiral Poindexter will also very strongly contradict some of the points that Colonel North made, particularly the assertion that the Colonel made that everything he did was approved by his superiors. Because as we know, Director Casey was not in the chain of command. His superiors were Robert McFarlane, who we'll now hear from, and then later, and during the most intense period, Admiral Poindexter. And I'm told that Admiral Poindexter will take issue with North's sworn testimony that he approves some of the items that Colonel North suggested he had approved.
Okay, Sam. Thank you very much indeed. So, in many respects, the drama and the contradictions of this continues. Britt?
Well, I think we're about to get going again here, Peter. I see Senator Inouye is in his chair. His hand is reaching for the gavel, and I think we may be about to hear it.
I'm certainly not going to see it.
Well, it doesn't appear we are. There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Britt, very much. Let you go back inside and listen. And Sam Donaldson, thank you very much. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Eastern Time, Robert McFarlane, he was the second witness ever to testify in these hearings that began back on May the 5th. He's appearing almost exactly 4 months after he was rushed to the Bethesda Naval Hospital because he attempted suicide by taking an overdose of Valium. His testimony is clearly important.
Repeat the oath again. Please rise, sir. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated. Yes, Mr. Bloomfield.
Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order just for clarification. I wonder if the chair would advise the panel as to what the future precedent of the committee is going to be in view of allowing Mr. McFarlane to come back and testify. What is your plans for others that wish to come back and have a second time?
Because of the unique nature of this request, Mr. McFarlane gave his testimony before we had received any information from Colonel North. And as a result, I don't believe that Mr. McFarlane was in any position to respond. Secondly, in the cases of, say, for example, Admiral Poindexter, he will be testifying after the fact. And so we felt that in fairness to Mr. McFarlane and at his request, we decided to take this extraordinary step. We do not wish to make this a precedent. I would like to announce that in the future, if other witnesses feel that their characters have been impugned, I would advise and recommend that their testimony be taken together with counsel in deposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But I believe the witness that was just before us, Colonel North, is without question one of the most important that this panel will receive. Therefore, of this unique nature, we felt that it was only proper, in the name of fairness, to permit Mr. McFarlane to testify. Mr. Chairman? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, so that I might not be misunderstood at a later date, and I don't intend to make any issue over Mr. McFarlane's appearance here today, but I think it is outside of the process that we had understood that we were following, and I, for one, wish we had not done it at this time.
Well, it was a possibility at all times, because I'm certain you will recall that whenever a witness was finished with his testimony, the chair advised the witness that we may call you back. And I think the record will show this very clearly in the case of this witness.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, again, I don't wish to make an issue of it. Mr. McFarlane is here, and I don't mean to second-guess the chairman. I think you have tremendous responsibilities in trying to make this a fair hearing and preserve its appearance of fairness as well as the reality of fairness. And I don't mean to impugn that motive at all. It's just that my concern is that whenever a witness feels that some other witness has testified in a way they don't agree with, they may wish to have another day in court. And I just don't know where that's going to end. If indeed Mr. McFarlane feels that Mr. North's testimony was at variance with his experience, I suspect the same thing may be true of every other witness we have heard or will hear.
It is a problem that we will have to face as they are presented to us, and I'm certain that we will do our best to abide with the rule of fairness.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
As I understand it, Mr. McFarlane requested the committee for the opportunity to appear to testify.
The Senator is correct.
And the committee was therefore faced with having to decide whether to accede to that request, and his appearance today represents a decision by the chair that he should be allowed to come and testify. He was not recalled by the committee, is that correct?
The Senator is eminently correct, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I think it should be noted that Mr. McFarlane initially appeared before us and does so again without any grant of immunity. I have been advised, Mr. McFarlane, that you have a statement that you wish to make.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Has this statement been filed with us for 48 hours?
No, it has not been, because the request came in yesterday.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to take part once more in the committee's efforts to use these hearings on the Iran-Contra matter to identify ways in which the processes used to formulate and carry out American foreign policy can be improved. Since last I was here, the committee has heard very important testimony. In particular, I would cite that of Ollie North. Perhaps as never before in this administration, the nation has treated to a comprehensive explanation of just what United States interests are in Central America, how those interests are threatened, and why our support for the Contras was, and is, in my judgment, still justified. It was a superb performance, passionate in delivery, and persuasive in argument. And for it, all of us, I think, are deeply indebted to Colonel North. In addition, as a personal opinion, I believe that everything that has been said by committee members and others about Colonel North's bravery and devotion to his country is true. And I say that as one who knows, for I have worked with Ollie for many, many years. As is to be expected, just as new testimony sheds light on previous areas of darkness, it may also raise new questions which require further illumination. Such is the case here. For just as millions, literally millions of Americans found themselves saying over and over again during Ali's testimony, his goals were certainly right, or I agree with the ends that he was seeking. Many of the same people found themselves asking, I wonder if the means have to include lying, or do we really want to keep the Congress completely in the dark? Or shouldn't there be some system of accountability? I'm here today because I want the record to be clear regarding my beliefs about how our government should function in the sensitive area of covert actions under our Constitution. I believe accountability is at the heart of our system of government. Also, while recognizing that the recollections of detail of events may differ between people, that honest witnesses who are busy with many matters inevitably will have different recollections of the same events many years later. And there's also the tendency for recollection to be colored by the way one would have liked to have acted, not the way in which one in fact did. And there are, in my judgment, some core facts about which I feel it's necessary to speak. At the outset, there seems to me to be a consensus, at least within the committee, regarding the legitimacy of and need for covert actions. Simply put, we aren't in a competition with a Democratic opponent. For the other side, unrestrained covert actions are a way of life. And just as they support Leninist political parties in developing countries, we had better be able to use a range of means to support people who aspire to freedom, or they will perish, and our own freedom, as we know it, will be in jeopardy. I also believe there is a consensus around the proposition that both the funding level and the intended scope of covert activities should be relatively modest. Any foreign policy issue that involves threats to truly vital national interests, the resolution of which will take significant funding for a long period of time, had better have the understanding and support of the American people going in. That support is engendered by vigorous public debate, something that is impossible in the case of covert actions, which must remain private. Well, if we agree on these 2 points, then the question becomes how covert actions ought to be conducted so as to maximize the prospects for their success, as well as to minimize the damage if they fail. It seems to me that the answer to this question, especially under conditions of governance that we face today, in which one party occupies the White House and the other control of the Congress, must be cooperation and compromise between the 2 branches. Needless to say, such an approach is inherently infeasible if either branch lacks integrity. That is, if either the executive branch ignores congressional restriction or fails to give the Congress full and complete information, or alternatively, if the Congress cannot protect the secrecy of information it is given, or through frequent changes of law demonstrates irresolution, as it certainly has here. Coming to cases, the issue before you concerns what went wrong when the Congress and the President disagreed over U.S. support for the Contras. First, if preventing the consolidation of an alien regime in Nicaragua was so important, the President should not have pinned his hopes in 1981 on a covert action for the reasons that I've discussed in earlier testimony. Second, once he did so, however, the Congress, in my judgment, worsened matters considerably by requiring the United States to break faith with these people before the policy had been given a fair chance to be tested. Third, notwithstanding the congressional vacillation, once the Congress spoke, the administration should have listened, even though to do so would have surely involved a tragic loss of life among those in Nicaragua who had become publicly and fatally identified by the Sandinistas. Alternatively, the administration could have chosen, as it apparently did, to disregard the Congress and pursue support for the Contras, relying entirely on private support. In my judgment, doing so was wrong for three reasons. First, there was very little prospect that this course would have been sustained by private funding at anywhere near the levels that could be poured in by the Soviet Union from the other side. In short, it would ultimately fail, and at a much larger cost in terms of human lives. Second, it would be politically unwise to do so, for by going it alone without congressional support, the current furor was almost guaranteed. And when it came, the President would be, as he is today, without allies to share in the defeat. Third, however, and most important in my judgment, to have chosen to establish a legal precedent concerning the President's sole responsibility to conduct foreign policy on an issue that was so poorly understood by the people of this country, and by behaving as if the President is not accountable to anyone, is simply wrong. The concept of accountability is firmly rooted in our political history for a very good reason. While in time of war, one might imagine a justifiable transgression of law by a president to avoid a catastrophe, even the limited exercise of this license has been a matter in which presidents have traditionally been very careful to enlist the support of members in Congress who would be there to share the blame if something goes wrong. The other reason for assuring accountability is also compelling. Without accountability, the temptation for a president to go beyond prudent limits to salvage a failing policy, especially if the majority in office is of the opposite party, will be virtually irresistible. And in circumstances of distress, while relying upon private parties who may not be competent or incorruptible, the margin for not just failure, but for the establishment of a climate of enduring hostility with the Congress is dangerously high. Colonel North testified that I gave him general authority to conduct covert operations involving widespread military and paramilitary activities based upon the position that the Boland Amendment did not apply to the NSC staff. He also stated that he kept me advised of all of his activities. Colonel North did report to me from time to time on a few, but certainly not all, of the activities that went beyond mere political support for the Contras. The committee has seen those memoranda, all 6 of them. One, for example, involved his request for permission to ask a private U.S. donor to provide a helicopter to the Contras. I specifically disapproved this proposal and noted that I did not believe that it was legal. On other memoranda in which Colonel North asked me to solicit funds from foreign governments, I rejected the proposals, and that is stated on the face of those documents, and you have them. On other memos, I did not respond, or the proposals were mooted by events. But implicit in all this was the premise that the Boland Amendment governed our actions. This is not to say that it isn't reasonably and properly subject to a court test, and I believe it should be. But on my own, I determined that because I had engaged, and Don Fortier had engaged, for days and weeks with members of this committee and others, chairmen and ranking members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and Senate counterpart, and others who would vote on this measure spent literally days and nights trying to forge compromise. At the end of it, we lost. And it was very evident that the intent of the Congress was that this amendment applied to the NSC staff. So it was a political judgment on my part, without prejudice to the legal position that must ultimately be determined by the courts. And I think also that the evidence that surely I did believe that the Boland Amendment applied to the NSC staff is expressed in the fact that otherwise, why would we have worked so hard to get rid of it after it was passed? If we felt that we were not covered, what was I doing? What was Don doing coming up here day after day trying to get rid of it? Colonel North testified that he and Director Casey had agreed upon a full-service operation to support the Contras using non-appropriated funds. I never heard of any such full-service operation from either Director Casey or Colonel North, and I certainly never concurred in one. But more importantly, I do not want the record to reflect that I subscribe to the notion that the executive branch can or should establish a self-sustaining private enterprise to carry out activities outside the oversight of the Congress. Colonel North has testified that he did not recall that I had directed him not to solicit funds to support the Contras. I did instruct him not to solicit funds, and according to his own testimony, and apparently other evidence, in fact, he did not do so. Colonel North also assured me that he was not soliciting funds when, as I have testified, I questioned him on this subject before signing the letter that he drafted for me to send to Congressman Barnes and to Chairman Hamilton later. Colonel North also testified that at a time before Congressman Barnes came to my office in October of 1985, when I drew Colonel North's attention to certain of his memoranda to me that raised doubts about his compliance with the law, I then instructed him, in Colonel North's words, to, quote, fix them, close quote. This is incorrect. In fact, Ollie proposed revision of certain of the documents, but only to conform them to his actual intent, which he said that I had misunderstood. He gave me an order to obtain my go-ahead for the project, 2 revised pages which were grossly at variance with the original text. So I did not approve them, I did not return them, and I ultimately discarded them. The effort, so far as I was concerned, was ended. Prior to my testimony, during questioning by the committee staff, I learned for the first time that within days before Colonel North left the White House in November 1986, he withdrew these documents and altered them. This was done without my knowledge or concurrence. Colonel North testified that I directed the White House chronologies be altered to say that everyone in the United States government believed in November 1985 that, quote, oil drilling parts, close quote, were being shipped by the government of Israel. This is not true. Colonel North advised me on the evening of November 18th, 1986, on the one brief occasion when I was involved in the chronology process at all, that no one in the U.S. government was aware that hawks were involved in that shipment until January 1986. I had no clear recollection of the matter, having spent the entire period variously in Geneva, Rome, Paris, London, California, but not Washington. Accordingly, my addition to the chronology on this subject, which is contained in a November 18, 1986 prof note to Admiral Poindexter, that's Exhibit 56 to my testimony, states only what I knew to be accurate. It states that, in addition to the shipment of TOW missiles in the summer of 1985, quote, other transfers of equipment, close quote, were made in the fall. It is a subsequent version written after I left town the next day, specifically the November 20th version that discusses, quote, oil drilling parts, apparently language similar to Director Casey's prepared testimony, with which I had nothing to do whatsoever. There are a number of facts upon which Colonel North's recollection differs from mine, but they are marginal to our basic disagreement. That disagreement involves a clear implication from his testimony that I authorized an operation involving pervasive disregard of statutory restraints, that I permitted, with knowledge, the creation of a separate, clandestine, and far-reaching network of private operations that involved private profits, and which was to be concealed even from other members of the executive branch, officials who were entitled to know the details of an authorized covert operation. It is true that the conduct of a covert operation, consistent with the narrow and changing restrictions of the various Boland amendments, required determinations of authority that were difficult and debatable, and in the long run could have been dangerous. But this is a far cry from saying that I or other members of the administration authorized what was clearly beyond anyone's power to authorize, specifically the so-called full-service offshore operation of Messrs. Secord, Hakim, and Gorbani Farr. This is untrue because it is unthinkable. It violates every tenet of my political beliefs, everything that I have sought throughout my career to sustain and advance. These are my beliefs in the rule of law and the doctrine of accountability. These are the essence of the constitutional form of government, which I have fought in war to defend, which I worked in Congress here to carry out, and were part of my deepest beliefs when I served in the executive branch as counselor to the Secretary of State and as the President's National Security Advisor. Finally, I would like to